All right, let's open our Bibles tonight to Romans or to the book of Genesis, chapter 44, verse 18. Genesis 44, verse 18. You're welcome. Joseph's story is unique in the fact that not only does the Lord give us 25% of the whole book of Genesis devoted to his ministry, to his life, but he's one of those guys that just, there's no fault found in him. There's no weakness in his armor. He's just a faithful guy whose story is almost too good to be true. You read it and you just say, how in the world can he live like that? And yet he did. When he was 18 years old, 10 of his brothers were out serving dad 65 miles away from home, watching some of their cattle and sheep and all. And Joseph went out to find them. Dad thought they'd been gone too long, and so he went out to see them. And they thought together, this would be a perfect way to get rid of him. We should just kill him. Dad had always expressed his love for Joseph, kind of his favorite, give him a coat, that kind of bore that out. Had another little brother named Benjamin who was just young at the time at home. And Reuben, the oldest, said, no, we shouldn't kill him, That wouldn't be right. What are we going to do? How are we going to face something like that? And so Judah said, well, let's sell him. And so they threw him in a pit, had their lunch, kind of listened to him wail and didn't really seem to care, sold him to a traveling bunch of merchants headed for Egypt. And Joseph was eventually sold into a family. The eunuch was a kind of a captain in Pharaoh's army, where for 10 years, Joseph is now 18 to 28 years old. He worked as the governor of the house. Everything was entrusted to him. He was a Hebrew boy who knew the Lord, but he was now living amongst the Egyptians. And yet he was faithful, and as a result, God blessed both he and the people he was serving. Potiphar had a wife who was a pretty aggressive woman who took a liking to Joseph, tried to kind of hit him up a couple of times, from a sexual kind of position. He always said, no, I'm sorry, kind of got away with it. One day, alone in the house, she kind of just put the moves on him, grabbed him, and he ran out of the house, and she yelled rape, and her husband sent him to prison. And for the next 2 to 3 years, he spent time in jail. Again, just a godly man doing the right thing, suffering what seems to be needlessly, all the time having to kind of factor into his understanding. His brothers sold him off, who went home and told dad that he'd been killed and mauled by some kind of a wild animal, showed his coat filled with some blood of a goat or something. And dad was just beside himself. It was his favorite. Again, Joseph was faithful in prison. He served well. They made him the head of the jail, I don't know, maybe the cell block or something. But in any event, one day, some of Pharaoh's servants, a baker and a butler, were thrown in prison, and they were there because it seems like maybe there had been a move put, if you will, on the Pharaoh, and maybe they were a part of it. We don't know, but needless to say, whoever and however that worked itself out, Joseph was there when they had a dream, and they both dreamed some horrible dreams, and Joseph was able to interpret the dream so that the butler was told, hey, after 3 days you're going to be let go. You're going to be declared innocent, and to the other fella, to the baker, he said, I'm sorry, you're going to lose your head. You're guilty, and you're going to die. When the butler was let loose from prison, Joseph said, tell the Pharaoh I didn't do anything wrong. I'd like to have my case heard, but he forgot, or he just didn't care. But needless to say, he went away, if you will, and said nothing. 2 years later or so, the Pharaoh had a dream, and it bothered him. He called all of his soothsayers, magicians. They didn't have a clue. The butler said, there's a guy in prison, and when you threw me in there and thought I had tried to poison you or whatever it is, I told him his dream, and his God told me what was going to happen, and it happened exactly like Joseph said. You need to talk to Joseph. And Joseph was quickly brought to the Pharaoh, summoned him up. God raised him up. The Pharaoh told Joseph he had this dream, and there were actually two dreams, and Joseph said, well, they're kind of the same thing, but the Lord is telling you what's coming up in the years to come. 7 years of tremendous fruitfulness in Egypt, and then 7 years of tremendous famine. So Joseph said, we should probably save up for those 7 years of good so that we'll have food when we need it, when we don't have it. And Pharaoh said, well, let's put someone in charge of that. And everyone said, well, there's nobody like Joseph. And so Joseph, in one day, went from prison guard to second in command of the world, if you will. This was a world power. And so by the time you get to chapter 41, the 7 years of good have passed. The famine has begun. And beginning in chapter 42, we began a series of studies that we wanted to put together because it really becomes for Joseph time that God's will for his life, as hard as it's been, becomes clear. He doesn't understand what God is doing. Certainly he could have not explained how his life had gone. How do you explain being sold by 10 of your brothers into slavery, your dad being told you're dead, 10 years later being accused of rape that you didn't commit, left in jail for 2 or 3 years, just kind of abandoned, and now all of a sudden pulled out of all of that. And so by the time you get to chapter 42, Joseph is 39 years old. We know from chapter 45 that it is the second year of the famine that has set in. So it's been 9 years forward, if you will. And for the first time in maybe his life, he's able to understand the purposes of God in allowing these things become clear. The hindsight now becomes a little bit, 2020, if you will. But in chapter 42, Jacob, his father, sends these 10 boys minus his now favorite son, Benjamin, who is the other boy that Rachel had bore him along with Joseph. And he sends them 265 miles on a trip to Egypt, to the Pharaoh, to get food because the famine had now reached Canaan land as well. They have money in their hands, and they want to buy some food. When they arrived, as you might suspect, Joseph recognized his brothers, even though it had been now 22 years since he had seen them almost. It shocked him. They bowed before him. He'd had a dream years earlier that one day that would happen. It had gotten his brothers angry. They were already jealous of him anyway. He didn't reveal himself to them at that point. He spoke, Egyptian through an interpreter to them. And he wanted to see a couple of things. Number one, were they sorry about what they had done? Because Joseph had been suffering with this for over 2 decades. Was his younger little brother okay? And how about his dad? Was he still alive? So he had some things that he wanted to kind of find out. He couldn't really ask them directly. So he accused them of being spies. Asked how, was their dad alive? Did he have any brothers at home? They just honestly told him the truth. They didn't think there was any reason to lie. And so Joseph, when he heard all of the answers, like I said, accused them of lying and said, you're just here to try to spy out the land. You want to steal food, don't you? No, we don't want to do anything like that. And he said, I think I'll just throw all of you in prison. And so for 3 days, he kept them in prison and then brought them back in. He said something very interesting to them. He said, I'm going to let all but one of you go home because I fear God. And he uses the term Elohim, very, very Hebrew, very Jewish, if you will, though the nation itself had really been established. But it would certainly have been odd to come out of a mouth of someone who was serving Pharaoh. Apparently the boys didn't pick up on it. So Joseph said, you go home and bring me your youngest brother. I want to see him, and then I'll know you're not liars, and then I'll give you some more food. Else, I'm going to keep this guy, and he's going to die. And he kept Simeon, who was by far the meanest of all of them, who seemed to be the least contrite about all of the things that had happened over the years. And so the boys were sent back. As they were getting ready to leave, though, they began to say to one another in Joseph's hearing, you know why this has happened to us? Because of what we did to Joseph. And the guilt of those 22 years as they spoke in their own language, Joseph there at the end of chapter 42 understood what they were saying. And he believed, or they believed, this was God's payback for their wickedness. They'd been looking, almost like they were looking for God to get even, right? Eventually this is going to catch up with me. And so it caused Joseph to turn away and weep, something which apparently he had done many times over the years. But guilt had riddled these boys. And we talked a couple of times, and especially I think last week, that the only way to get rid of this is to confess your sins to the Lord. God can lift the burden, right? He has a justified reason and a way to forgive you. But if you won't bring that to him, then you have to live with it. And these guys have lived for that, and they're just waiting for the hammer to drop now. So Joseph, seeing them, goes out to weep, and he hears of their guilt and sorrow. And here they were at least acknowledging for the first time in Joseph's understanding their sins. So they go home. On the way home, they stop at some rest stop. They open one of the bags to get some food for the donkey, and they find that there's money inside, the money they'd paid for this food. It made them feel even more guilty, more fearful. So they hurried home, and as they opened up the grain sacks, the money was in each one of them, and thought, oh man, now we're really in trouble. They told Dad, Jacob, their report, and that they had to bring Benjamin back, and Jacob said, no way, man, I've lost Joseph. I guess we're losing Simeon. Didn't seem to be too sad about that. But I'm not going to send you Benjamin. No way. All things are against me. He doesn't see God's hand in any of this, but Joseph's starting to see the hand of God after 22 years of really having no explanation at all. Reuben, in guilt, offers to have his own children killed if he can't bring Benjamin back. That's guilt speaking. That's nonsense. It doesn't even make any logical sense. It's foolish. But it's this convicted heart, and Jacob just ignores him. As you get to chapter 43, 44, and 45, it really is one story together. We broke it up last week because we don't want to just rush through it. But it begins at the time when the boys have to go back to Egypt because they've run out of food. Jacob says to the boys, go get some more food. And it is Judah who said, maybe you don't remember. He said, if we showed up without Benjamin, we're going to die. So we got to go with him or we're not going to go at all. And Jacob had put this decision off as long as he could. So now he gets mad at the boys. He blames them for shooting their mouth off too much the first time. The boys defend themselves by saying, well, we just answered innocent questions. How were we to know that this is what he was going to use against us? And finally, Judah speaks, and he takes responsibility for Benjamin. And Jacob has no other choice at this point. His hand is kind of forced. He goes, all right, I guess if I'm going to be, brokenhearted and grieved, then that's the way it's going to be. But hey, take some expensive gift basket with you. And whatever the cost might have been, it had to be just frighteningly high during a time of severe famine. But that's kind of the old Jacob, right? Let's scheme and try to butter up the Pharaoh a little bit. And besides, take the money back. Take double the money. We don't want him to accuse us of stealing as well. When all is said and done, in chapter 43, I think verse 14, he finally says, may Almighty God give you mercy. And he's not Jacob, now he's Israel, governed by the Lord. He uses the term El Shaddai. If God can't care for this, no one can. I'm going to throw ourselves on the mercy of Almighty God. And he's my hope, but at the meantime, if I lose my son in this, then there's nothing else that I can do. I have no choice, really. For months in Egypt, Simeon sat in prison. Anxious Joseph, who sent these boys, his brothers, away, I'm sure walked out every day and looked at the line to see if they were back. And one day they were back. The 10 boys come back, double money in hand, expensive fruit basket as well, 265 miles of dangerous roads, and the famine is just severe. When Joseph sees Benjamin, he orders his steward of his house to take all of the men to his house for lunch. And again, they're just terrified. This guilt thing has just worked them over to no end. They say to each other, it's the money. They're going to accuse of taking money. And so they say to the steward, hey, look, we discovered the money. We brought back twice, but we don't want to steal anybody's money. And the steward said, no, I collect the money. I've gotten money for your last batch. Your God must have been good and blessed you. Chapter 43, I think, verse 23. So they are welcomed into Joseph's house. They are washed. Their animals are fed. Before at noon, Joseph comes in, and he finds them on their faces again, with presents in hand, scared, money, to return. And Benjamin, with him. Joseph asks about his father. Is my father, not my father, is your father still alive? And they said, yeah, he's well. And then he sees Benjamin there, and he orders the steward to set them up for lunch. Joseph sits at his own table. His servants sit at another. The Hebrew boy sits at a third table. That's the Egyptian way, we're told. And Joseph sets them in order of their ages at dinner or at lunch. Can you imagine? Again, if you're paying attention, how does he know how old we are? And then the food comes. And everybody gets a plate full of food except Benjamin. He gets 5 platefuls of food. Why? I think Joseph wanted to see if they were still jealous of this boy, like they had treated him so badly. And Joseph had tested their sincerity first. They had brought him back. Now he tests their jealousy, and pretty soon he'll test their love for Benjamin and for their father. Chapter 44, which we started last week, began with them being sent home again. Bags of grain, money again restored into their bags. But this time to Benjamin's bag, Joseph added his silver goblet, a drinking vessel of wealth. Not clay, but silver. When they had gone away, Joseph sent his soldiers to overtake them and accuse them of stealing this goblet. The boys were sure they hadn't done that, and they began to swear that they couldn't have, even declaring very loudly, if any of us took it, we'll kill that person. And the soldier said, okay, we can do that. And again, they began the search, but they started with the oldest. And they worked their way to the youngest. Well, at least for all those bags until they got to Benjamin, everything looked fine. And they got a little bit more cocky. And then Benjamin's bag was opened, and out fell this goblet. And they did something very interesting. They tore their clothes in grief. They loaded up their donkeys, and they all went back to face the music together with Joseph, to stand before Joseph with Benjamin. They could have just went home, taken their food, and sorry, Benjamin, you knucklehead. You're also Dad's favorite. But things had changed, and they had changed with most of the boys, especially Judah, as we'll find out tonight. Which brings us to verse 18. See how quickly we got here? 4 chapters later. But we'd like to finish down through chapter 45 tonight if we can. I know that there's a way to go through these chapters more quickly, but I sincerely think that the Lord lays this narrative out over so many years so that we might maybe stop and consider it a little bit more than we would normally. There's a scripture in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, I think it's verse 11, where Paul, in speaking about the Old Testament, said to the Corinthians, all of these things were written all of these things happened to them for our learning, so that we might learn through their admonition, upon whom we, the ends of the age, have come. When he wrote to the Romans, he said in chapter 15, verse 4, these things were written for our learning, so that we, through the patience and the comfort of the scriptures, can find hope. 2 times Paul went back to these stories to say, here's how we learn what we can do with God as far as trusting him and following him and depending upon him. And so we've kind of just decided to slow down a little bit. I'm sorry we're beating a story to death maybe, but it's a lesson we certainly want to learn. In fact, one of the things that you will read in the New Testament constantly is the words, it is written, it is written, it is written, all referring to Old Testament times. And so we're coming to the end of the story tonight. That's, I guess, my word to you. I'm sure you've heard of Murphy's Law, right? Murphy's Law. If something can go wrong, it will go wrong. But if I wash my car, in fact, I got my car washed yesterday. It's going to rain tomorrow. This is brilliant. This is brilliant. Maybe you've done that as well. But there's another biblical law that I'd like you to consider. I'll call it Joseph's Law. And Joseph's Law is if something does appear to go wrong, you can trust God because behind the scenes, he's doing something good. Maybe that's a better law to know. It's the Romans 8:28 principle, right? All things work together for good. I think I told you last week that R.A. Torrey said of Romans 28, it is a soft pillow for a tired heart. It's a good place to rest. That if something appears to be wrong and you're walking with the Lord, behind the scenes, God's got something good up his sleeve. You probably couldn't have convinced Joseph of that for 22 years. But I'll guess really loud, I would imagine really loudly now he's singing that song because he's putting it together and seeing what God would do. You know, Murphy's Law is for pessimists, for cynics. Joseph's Law is for believers. Murphy sees everything on a horizontal plane. Joseph added a vertical perspective and sees God in the midst of it. And for 22 years, he cannot begin to fathom what God is doing. Could have questioned, could have been angry, could have backslid, could have walked away, and probably would have found lots of agreement amongst the people. But he's one of these amazing saints who has just decided God's doing something good. And now, after 22 years, he gets to see it in his life. He gets to understand what the Lord is doing. So we'll pick up the story in verse 18, where the boys are now returning with Benjamin to face the music for being accused of stealing Joseph's silver goblet. In fact, let's start at verse 14, just to kind of give us the context. So Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, and he was still there, and they fell before him on the ground. Joseph said to them, "What is this deed that you have done? Did you not know that such a man as I can certainly practice divination?" And Judah said, "What shall we say to you, my lord? And what shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants, and here we are, my lord's slaves. We and he among whom the cup has been found." But he said, "Far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose cup it has been found, he shall be my slave. As for you, you can go home. You can go in peace to your father." So Joseph says, as they fall down, "I'm not interested in punishing all of you. I just want to deal with the guilty party. I'll deal with Benjamin, and the rest of you can go home." You got the picture now. Now, and I'm going to read to you all the way down to verse 34, because I want you to hear Judah's speech in its entirety. Judah, the fellow that in chapter 38, right, had left that woman pregnant, that prostitute who had gotten so angry with God over some of the things his sons had faced. Judah is changed. This has changed Judah. Judah would become a godly man. But here's Judah, who had suggested, remember at the time, 22 years earlier, let's not kill him, let's sell him, and we'll put some money in our pockets. And they want one with silver jangling in their pockets. So Judah is now the one to step forward into what could certainly have been a death situation. After all, Joseph was second in charge, and he had absolute authority. Well, here's Judah, verse 18. And Judah came near to him and said, "Oh, my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's hearing. And do not let your anger burn against your servant, for you are even like Pharaoh. My Lord asked his servant, saying, 'Have you a father or a brother?' We said to my Lord, 'We have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age who is young. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him.' Then you said to your servants, 'Bring him down to me, that I might set my eyes upon him.' And we said to my Lord, 'The lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die.' But you said to your servants, 'Unless your youngest brother come down with you, you shall see my face no more.' And so it was when we went up to your servant my father that we told him the words of my Lord. Now my father said, 'Go back and buy a little food.' But we said, 'We cannot go down if our younger brother is with us. If he's not with us, then if we go down, for we will not see the man's face unless our younger brother is with us.' And your servants, my father, said to us, 'You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. And the one went out from me, and I said, Surely he's been torn to pieces, and I've not seen him since. But if you take this one also from me, and a calamity would befall him, he'll be brought down. He'll bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. Now therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and the lad is not with me, his life is bound up in the lad's life. And it will happen when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. So your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant our father with sorrow to the grave. For your servant has become surety for the lad to my father. I said, if I did not bring him back to you, then I will bear the blame before my father forever. So therefore, please, let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go to my father if the lad is not with me? Lest perhaps I see the evil that would come upon my father. Pretty heavy duty, don't you think? I mean, Judah stands here and passes the ultimate test, at least for Joseph, that of loving his father and having a love for his younger brother. I'll take the debt. I'll stand in his place. Judah really becomes a type of Christ here, at least in his actions and in his words. He wants to take our place. He'll take the place of the guilty. Jesus, from the Lion of the tribe of Judah, will redeem one day. It's a beautiful picture. The speech of Judah, you can just imagine what that must have done to Joseph's heart. This is exactly what he's looking for. He hears about his great love for his dad, his sorrow over his death, even what the boys told of his disappearance. He mentions it there in verse 28. Well, I guess he's been torn to pieces by an animal. The guilt that they've carried for 22 years. This was a real heartfelt kind of confession. And Joseph is finally hearing that the boys understood the grief that they are caused, and they were willing, at least now, to not do that again. I'll stay. Let him go. He and Dad are inextricably kind of intertwined. If that means my life, that's fine. But he says of Jacob, who's old now, his life is bound up in the lad's life. Jacob hadn't quit playing favorites. He just moved on to his other son. He had so loved Rachel and the two boys, first Joseph and then Benjamin, but the brothers here show more concern for their father and for Benjamin than they do for themselves. Something has changed. 22 years of guilt have gotten a lot accomplished. The statement, if it's true, and I suspect that it is, tells us that Jacob hadn't handled loss very well. He never has moved on. He has a big family, got 11 boys and a daughter, but he just seems to just lived in the past. And now he's invested his entire, I've lost one son. Now if I lose this one, I'm dead. Which isn't really a good way to grieve, you know? He's almost inseparable, almost like, you know, I wonder if Benjamin wasn't suffocated by his father, because you're all I have. After 22 years, you would think his grieving might be over, but it isn't. He's paralyzed. I've had the opportunity over the years to counsel people who've lost loved ones, and it's never, you know, the Bible says death is the last enemy that we face. And that's an enemy. It breaks people's hearts, and well, it should. But I know people just never gotten over it. They have a bedroom at home that their son used to live in, hasn't been changed in 25 years. You know, usually grief starts with denial, and then shock, and then anger. Sometimes you get mad at God. Sometimes people get mad at the person who died. How could you leave me by myself? Sadness, depression, but eventually you move along to cope. But Jacob never did. It was pretty unhealthy, I think, how he's gone through it. But his son, Judah, he understands it. He understands his father and his difficulty. And there's a tremendous change of heart here, because this is the guy that had suggested selling Joseph off. Judah, back in verse 32. Oh, no, I guess in this chapter. He had shared with Joseph that he had made Dad a promise that he would be responsible for Benjamin's well-being. So look, if I don't bring him back, he's going to die. So keep me. I think this is all the proof that Joseph needed, right? This is all that Joseph was looking for. Proof of their sorrow over their sinfulness, proof of their lack of jealousy over Jacob's love for these two boys in particular. It was more than he could handle. So Joseph at this time just wants to let them all know, and I'll let them off the hook. And you know, this is like a tremendous insight from Joseph. This is 22 years of wondering what God was up to, being faithful and seeing nothing come of it until now. So we read in chapter 45, verse 1, Joseph could not restrain himself before all who stood by him, and he cried out, "Let everyone go out from me." And so no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. The Egyptian servants were put out, the interpreter was put out, and he made himself known to his brothers. They'd only known him as the Lord of Egypt. Now he would be seen as Joseph. And Joseph's love for them, the other side of this, I think, important story, his joy in seeing Benjamin, his joy of hearing that his father was still alive, in seeing the willingness on the part of his brothers in Judah to protect Benjamin, the little one, and serve dad, was too much. He would have pulled off his fake beard. I think I told you that the Egyptians, they didn't have hair on their bodies anywhere. They shaved everything, heads and faces, but they'd have these horse hair and camel hair, fake beards and headdresses and all. So he speaks to them in Hebrew, makes himself known, and he begins to weep again. In fact, we read he wept again aloud, and the Pharaohs and the house of Pharaoh, the Egyptian in the house of Pharaoh, they heard it. It was loud and long. The long 22-year estrangement was over, and the enmity between them was removed. And Joseph said to his brothers in verse 3, "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. By the word dismayed here means troubled, or alarmed, or disturbed, or afraid. Oh man, this is worse than we thought. That's Joseph. And he has all the power. Joseph said to his brothers, verse 4, "Please come near to me." And so they came near, and he said, "I'm Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved. Don't be angry with yourselves because you sold me here. God sent me before you to preserve life." He invites them to come closer. The word nagash literally means in Hebrew, "come and look into my eyes," or make eye contact. I'm the one you sold. But don't you be grieved. Don't be mad at yourself. You sold me, but God sent me. I love that verse 5. You sold me, God sent me. He mentions it to focus their hearts on the Lord and his work. I love how Joseph can see, even at this very emotional and difficult time, the sovereignty of God's hand overruling the actions of men. Even so that the wrath of men now praise him. Even the worst that the boys had tried to do now brought honor to the Lord. Where's that? Psalm 70? I think it's Psalm 76, right? Verse 10. The wrath of man shall praise you. So Joseph speaks, but he doesn't speak in anger. Wouldn't you have spoken in anger? I think I would have. He speaks to make sure they're comfortable. Don't be angry with yourself. God had other ideas in mind. He has turned your sin into a blessing. My hands will be God's hands of grace. God has put me ahead of you so that you could be blessed. Not exactly your average response in this situation. Not exactly your average person, Joseph. He knew his Lord well. His eyes had been set firmly upon him for 22 years. And finally, he gets to get a glimmer of what God was up to. God was still ruling, even though for years it looked like all was lost. Joseph gets to see his faith realized. I would suggest to you, if you are walking with the Lord and things are rough, just wait. Just wait and see. God is very faithful, and his purposes will be made clear. He wanted to save this family. Joseph had been set ahead. I get it now. Joseph, I get it now. You sold me, God sent me. I love that. What a great insight. And then he says this, for these 2 years, the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be no plowing or harvesting. The boys wouldn't have known that. Joseph knew about that prophecy. And God has sent me before you to protect a posterity for you in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. Now I would say, I went back and read it. No, they sent him there, unless you have an eye on the Lord. It is not you who sent me there, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and a lord over all of his house and a ruler throughout all of the land of Egypt. Here's Joseph's theological statement. This is Joseph's view of life. And he includes in every part of it this vertical component, right? In other words, he suffered greatly, and now he sees the purposes of God fulfilled. And the temporary difficulty, 22 years, was nothing to be compared with the glory that he understood now. Psalm 106, this is what it says. He called for a famine in the land, and he destroyed all of the provisions of bread, and then he sent a man before them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. They hurt his feet with fetters. He was laid in irons until the time his word came to pass. And the word of the Lord tested him. And the king sent and released him. And the ruler of the people let him go free. And he was made lord of the house, ruler over all of his possessions, so he could bind his princes at his pleasure and teach his elders wisdom. The description of Joseph was he suffered greatly. He had chains around his arms while he was in jail. It hurt. This wasn't some easy path. Psalm 107:5, it describes that which God had done. And the Lord tested him. He waited upon him, and then God used him. Here's his philosophy. 3 years in prison, no country club, tough place. How long would you have lasted before you cried out, I don't believe in you anymore? I've prayed and prayed, been faithful. But what a test of faith it has been to continue to believe God loved him and was for him. And through it all, God was working, had a plan, wouldn't waste the suffering of his children needlessly, keeps your tears in a bottle. He knows what he's up to. He's a good God. But that doesn't mean life is easy. Nothing and no one can hinder his plans, so we can rest in his care. But so often we want to blame other people for our troubles. Joseph wasn't willing to do that. Look what he said in verse 8. It wasn't you who sent me here. Well, yes, it was. You bunch of jerks. But he saw it differently. God sent me here. And how could he say that now? Because he saw it all unravel in front of him. All come to fruition in front of him. Through it all, God had worked. If so-and-so hadn't said this or done that, then everything would have been well. You know, we turn so quickly on people's and try to blame them as if somehow the will of God is so easily bent by others. The will of God is never bent by others. God's will for your life is never disturbed by others. He'll have his way. Just rest in him. When we started the church here 38 years ago, for months we looked for a place to meet. Since the school we were meeting in was being reactivated and they told us we had months to relocate. We went to every possible place to try to find places. It was frustrating, and the rejection and the worry and the time restraints. And looking back, and we've talked about it a lot, the last thing I did was rest in the Lord's provision. I knocked on doors. I called people at night. Gave up. One of our board guys who went to be with the Lord since then called me and goes, the Lord told me just to let it go. He was going to bring it to you. And I went, yeah, whatever. And hung up the phone. Whatever. And then one morning the phone rang, and the guy that owned this property said, would you like to come and share the property with us? I said, what do you mean share? He said, well, you can meet in the afternoon. We'll meet in the morning. I said, no. But I'll buy the place from you if you want. And you can stay as long as you want for free. He took that to his congregation. They liked it. 3 months later, we bought the place. And the Lord just brought it to us. And that board member got that little tag, prophet. We got him a shirt. He was right. And looking back, I wish I had been more faithful to trust the Lord. It was great pressured time for us, but I learned a lesson. If God be for us, who can be against us? So I like verse 8. I like verse 5. I like you sold, he sent. I like you thought you sent me here, God sent me here. Isaiah, is it 54 that says, no weapon formed against us will prosper. Every tongue that rises up against us in judgment will condemn. This is the heritage of the saints of the Lord, and their righteousness comes from me. So you're in good company if you wait upon the Lord. So when you want to learn, you should learn verse 8. It should be a memory verse. You didn't send me here, God did. Or verse 5. You sold me, God sent me. I love the lesson. It's a lesson. I'm sure you have it in your head right now. I hope you have it in your heart tomorrow. So Joseph says this, hurry up and go to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all of Egypt. Come down to me, don't tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, you and your children and your children's children, your flocks and your herds, all that you have. There I will provide for you, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty, for there are still 5 years of famine. And behold, your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it is my mouth that speaks to you. So you shall tell my father of all of my glory here in Egypt and of all that you have seen, and hurry, bring my father down here. And he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. And he kissed him and his brothers, and they wept, and all that his brothers talked with him. Go home, get dad. Tell him about the glory God has given to me. Let him come live here so we can take care of him. He showed them real grace, tremendous forgiveness, and then he offered them the best land in Egypt. The Goshen place was the place along the delta, the Nile Delta. It's about 9,000 square miles. It's about twice the size of Los Angeles County. Enough room for 70 people, I would think, because that's about how many they had. I don't know, verse 15. You read it and you just kind of go, well, I can't imagine the apologying and the hugging and the relief from the nightmares. And it's almost kind of like everybody just got saved, The family got saved. Joseph is so gracious. Go tell. Verse 16 says, now the report of this got heard in Pharaoh's house, and they said, Joseph's brothers have come, and it pleased the Pharaoh and his servants well. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers to do this, load your animals and depart, go to the land of Canaan, bring your father and your households and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt. You shall eat the fat of the land. Now, you are commanded to do this. Gives them an order. Take carts out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives. Bring your father and come. And don't be concerned about your goods, for the best of the land of Egypt is yours. Joseph is so loved by Pharaoh in all of this trials in his life that the Pharaoh wants to be like the best host ever. He offers provisions, open arms for Joseph's family. They weren't Egyptians. They were Hebrews. First class transportation in the new Egyptian carts, the latest innovation. Go get dad, and don't bother to bring your furniture. We got better stuff here. Don't bother to bring your old stuff. Get some new stuff when you get here. Verse 21, and so the sons of Israel did so. And Joseph gave them carts according to the command of Pharaoh, and he gave them provisions for their journey, and he gave to all of them, to each man, a change of garment. But to Benjamin, he got 300 pieces of silver, and he got 5 new suits. And he sent to his father these things, 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and food for his father for the journey. And so he sent his brothers away, and they departed, and he said to them, see that no one becomes troubled along the way. So carts, provisions, 20 donkeys, food, gifts. By the way, change of clothes, at least in those days, tremendous mark of wealth. Benjamin gets 5 times as much as everyone else. And then something interesting, verse 24, Joseph says, on your way home 265 miles, make sure that no one is troubled. It isn't a warning about trouble along the way. It's warning about being perturbed with each other, being shaken. It would be a long trip home. They had all been relieved of their guilt. And Joseph could almost wonder, would there be squabbling or infighting? Guard your temper, guard your testimony. To Joseph, this is over. This is done with. We're not dealing with this anymore. Move along. So they come around the corner after this long journey, and verse 25, they went up out of Egypt, and they came to the land of Canaan and to Jacob their father. And they told him, Joseph's alive. He's governor over all of the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart stood still because he did not believe them. But when they told him all of the things which Joseph had said to them, when they showed him the carts which Joseph had sent to carry him away, the spirit of Jacob their father was revived, and Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is alive, and I'm going to go see him before I die. The word still, his heart became still, is the Hebrew word for numb. Don't know if he had a heart attack or just had one of those spells. He didn't believe what he heard until he saw what they'd sent, and then he was convinced. Great story, don't you think? Let's close thinking about forgiveness. Because forgiveness, at least biblically, is always a choice. If you base it upon feelings, you will never get there. Feelings hurt. Feelings are betrayed. Feelings that you've been let down. Feelings like you've been taken advantage of. Had Joseph gone by feelings, he'd have never got there. If you just wait for other people to repent, that's really not helpful to you. It is a matter of choice. God has chosen, because of Jesus, to forgive you. We are called upon to forgive one another. Corrie ten Boom had a chance to actually talk to her a couple of times when she was still alive because she was Dutch. But she came from a Christian family, and they lived in Haarlem in Holland over a jewelry store. Her dad was a watchmaker, and during the war, they hid Jews in the walls of their home. Eventually, they were found out, and the whole family and siblings were sent to a concentration camp, and most of the family was murdered, sent to the gas chambers. She survived the harsh treatments. Years later, she was used by the Lord to begin to speak in churches about God's mercy and his grace, always preach the gospel. And to be honest, in Holland, preaching the gospel is hard to do. People don't listen. It's a real post-Christian almost, like Europe is in many ways. But she would share with people, and she told the story about how one day, as she was sharing in a place and had invited people to come up to pray, a man walked up to her that turned out to be the guard from her camp. And with a shaking hand, he stuck it out to her and said, I want you to forgive me. I'm sorry for what I did to your family. And she wrote, as she remembered thinking, she said, all of the memories flooded back. The hatred, the mistreatment. Here's what she wrote. I stood there with a coldness clutching my heart, and I know that will can function regardless of the temperament of the heart, and so I asked Jesus to help me. Woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into his outstretched hands, and I experienced an incredible thing. The current, she said, started in my shoulders, raced down into my arms, and sprung into my clutched hands. Then this warm reconciliation began to flood my being as tears were produced in my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried with my whole heart. And for a moment we grasped each other's hand, and the former guard and the former prisoner were made together. I've never known the love of God so intensely as I did in that moment. To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that prisoner was you. So these boys get to walk out that day free. And Joseph gets to grow another foot in the Lord. I don't like Joseph because he's so good at everything. But I sure like reading about him. What a shock it was to be forgiven. What a shock it is when you discover that God wants to forgive you. What a shock it is that he forgave us. And if you're not forgiven yet, here's a shock. He'll do it for you right now if you'll let him. Father, thank you tonight for your word to us. What a great life Joseph is in terms of his example to us. What a great example he's been these 22 years of faithfulness. And we don't know much about his first 18, but we certainly have a lot to go on over the next 2 decades of his faithfulness to you, of his suffering without explanation, of his loss without any way to really make the case that God is working all things out for good, but he just believed that God was good. So he served faithfully as a slave, as a prisoner, and then even as one promoted for faithfulness. He never lost sight of who you were. And when he had a chance to get even, he found rest in your grace. He extended the arm of your mercy. He forgave those that he could have certainly had a case against because they enslaved, but God sent. They didn't send him to Egypt, God did. And Joseph believed it with all of his heart. May you convince us, Lord, tonight that there's nothing in our lives as we walk with you that you can't handle. There's nothing that comes into our life but that doesn't have a purpose. That you don't waste the tears of your saints. That you don't put us in spots to be suffering and hurt and struggling just so that we would suffer. You put us there for good. And if, like Joseph, we can learn that you're good and to keep our eyes on you and to be faithful wherever you put us, we will also one day discover the purposes for which you allowed these things to come. Convince us of that again tonight, Lord. And like Joseph, may we rest in the purposes of God in our lives. If you don't know Jesus tonight, our pastors will be up front. We would love to pray with you so that you can receive from the Lord forgiveness for your life, for your sin, for your rebellion. Maybe you've been away from the Lord for a while, then come. If you're online, you can follow the description box link and call us tomorrow as well if you like. We'd love to pray with you. But if you're here tonight carrying burdens of those things, here's where confession delivers, makes free. Whom the Lord sets free is free indeed. You come and let Jesus do that for you tonight. And for the rest of you, may you face tomorrow with a different attitude. The Lord is doing something good. Just remember, there's a Joseph's law. You would do well to remember it each day.